All right, everybody, please welcome to the stage, already there, Zack Johnson. Hello. From Asymmetric, and one of the creators of West of Loathing. Take it away, Zack.
So Asymmetric is a studio that's been around for a long, long time. If we are known for anything at this point, it is for, oh man, Alt-Tab stopped working. There we go. It is for this game, Kingdom of Loathing. Thanks, that's sweet of you guys. So this is for those of you in the audience who weren't clapping about that, this is in 2003, I sort of set myself the challenge of making a game in a week and then releasing it to the public in the hopes that anyone else being enthusiastic about a thing that I had done would lead me to actually finish it. But I decided that the game should be like a web MMO, which can just never be finished. So it worked, and people started playing it, and it has been successful enough that basically a few months in, it became my day job. A few months after that, it became the day jobs of a bunch of my friends, and has continued to be that for 13 and a half years. It did the sort of normal arc that an MMORPG does, which it has like a period of of a successful one, maybe not a normal one. It has a period of explosive growth followed by a really, really long tail off into obscurity. Ultima Online just turned like 19 or 20 or something, and still a lot of people playing it, and there's still like a team running it. Unfortunately for us, that explosive growth happened in 2004, so we are very much a late game MMORPG at this point. Still, it's still going strong. There's 379 people playing right now, for instance. But we decided, it's probably time to work on something else, and that's why we're here showing West of Loathing, which is our new thing. But I will show you guys for a minute, just because it turns out I have an hour to fill, what Kingdom of Loathing is like for people who don't know.
Can I get you to get right up on your mic, too?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just shout into it.
Put the mic right on me. So this is our new player onboarding experience. If you played this when you were in grade school, it didn't look like this. But basically, you've got these silly character classes that you choose between. I'll be a seal clubber. They hail from the frigid Northlands, because there's always one character class from the frigid Northlands. And I'll name him Charles Blimp. So, because this was a one-person project, it kind of had to be done in a way that I could do all of it myself. And so this is the way that I draw pictures. And the code is written the way that I write code, and the system administration and database stuff was written the way that I did that. That was what I did for work, so that part of it was pretty much under control, but the rest of it is it's rudimentary, and I think the reason that we've stuck with it for so long is that it turned out to have a marginal amount of charm, and it was a thing that I could just continue doing. So I'm going to go and skip the tutorial because I already know how to play. This is we like to start all of our games out with a bird joke that no one gets. So the tutorial is delivered by the toot Oriole, because you never say that out loud. Often people play for years without understanding. All right, and basically, this game, over many years, figured out what it was, but what it started out as was a sort of a menu of goofy places that you could go by clicking on them, and then it would tell you a little story about what happened there, and then make a number get bigger, or give you a new pair of pants, or a new hat, or something. And none of those things did anything at the time, but slowly, as more people were paying attention to it, and as I got more and more interested in working on it, like, game systems emerged, and it became this really sort of sprawling, but still pretty casual, pretty accessible RPG. Let's see. Let's go to town and see if we can get a quest to go on. Down to Market Square, and there's an animated GIF here, which means that guy has something to say to you, the good old meatsmith. So what's happened with him is that the guy from the skeleton store next door came by and ordered a bunch of weapons and armor, but then didn't bring the meatsmith his payment. So you gotta go to the skeleton store and see what you can do. And as you might expect, things at the skeleton store didn't go all that well, so now all the skeletons are things that you gotta fight. So, see, one thing the tutorial would have taught me is to equip that weapon that they gave me, so I'm gonna do that. But essentially what this game is you just click on stuff and then you read it. And ultimately, we put in a mechanic called Ascension, which you basically play through a whole bunch of quests, and then you kind of new game plus, and you get to keep a skill with you from your previous run, and that's how the kind of long-term character advancement thing goes. And so what emerged from that was a kind of serious competitive scene of speedrunning the thing, which was, it's kind of nice for us in some ways, and it's kind of a pain in the ass for us in other ways, because it makes it so the people who are really serious about the game only care about a very limited subset of the stuff that's in it, so there's less for us to keep track of. But we will often accidentally do things that are just silly and meant for the casual RPG lunch break player types that will have some unintended effect on something that the serious players do, and so you get this real like esports angst happening. But so this game, in a lot of ways, was inspired by the games that I played when I was young on BBSs, sort of pre-internet. And there was a thing called a door game, which I think was called that because you were technically running a piece of software that wasn't the BBS software. So you would dial into the BBS, and then you would go to play this game. And there was one in particular called Legend of the Red Dragon, which was the first time that I ever saw what has now come to be pretty derisively referred to as an energy system, mostly because of the way that they're used in modern free-to-play games. But the point of letting you do a limited number of things in the BBS days was because they only had a limited number of phone lines, and they didn't want people to just be able to play as long as they wanted. And I thought that that was kind of a cool balancing mechanic, because it meant that you could potentially compete with people who had more spare time than you because you were limited by this resource. And so that's the way that I built KOL, and we sort of vowed early on to never sell turns, and I think that that has managed to keep us on the right side of ethical free-to-play. The revenue model for Kingdom of Loathing, sort of no one came up with it. I certainly didn't have a plan to begin with. I just made this thing and put it out there, and then the first hosting bill showed up, and I was like, $70? Like, no way. So I put a thing on the front page that said, hey, would anybody mind kicking in some money to pay for the hosting on this, because this is going to get out of hand in a hurry. And the just outpouring of support was immediate and really gratifying, and it would just, something about the game, and I think part of it attracted a certain kind of person, in large part, I think, because of this thing where you cannot go into the chat without, and I'm not going to register an email account, which is what you have to do now. You used to have to do the sort of cumbersome old school sign up where you'd have to type your email address, now type it again, now type a password, now go to this email and click on this thing, and that'll activate your account. And we've made the onboarding a lot easier in the last few years. But you basically had to pass a grammar test before you were allowed to speak in the chat. So you had to prove that you could tell the difference between YOUR and YOU''RE. You had to like type a sentence in correctly and punctuate it and capitalize it right. And that was, I mean, it was partially a joke, but partially also because I wanted the chat to be a thing that wasn't terrible. And it worked out pretty well, because we ended up with this just amazing community. And you know, like I said, in the beginning, when it first started getting expensive and I asked for help, people rose to the occasion and were really great about it. And then somebody said, well, what if you gave us something in exchange for donating money? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, what do you want? And they said, well, there's this really highly sought after item called the Mr. Accessory. And what that was I had recently added the accessory inventory slot, and I made an item for testing that called Mr. Accessory, and it was just like a smiley face button that you would wear. And you couldn't get it in the game because it was just a test item that I had made, but in those days there were so many, like, because I'm a really, really good programmer, there were often bugs that would allow you to just create an arbitrary item out of nowhere. And we always tried to foster a culture of like, well, if we kind of let people screw around with stuff and don't be too harsh about it, they're going to be more likely to tell us when they find problems. And so we actually we had this kind of reward system where there was a sword that you could only get if you found and reported a really serious bug. But because that Mr. Accessory was an item that existed, but that you could only get through some weird cheating thing, it was like, oh, if you have one of those, that must mean something cool happened to you. So they said, well, what if you give people a Mr. Accessory in exchange for donating? I'm like, oh, okay. So if you give us $10, you get a Mr. Accessory. And then that went on for a while. And then because you could only wear 3 accessories at a time, people started saying, well, what if we want to give you more than $30? There's nothing that we can do with these extra Mr. Accessories. And also the item wasn't like a good item. It was just like a test item that, you know, just had some stats on it that weren't that important. So opened a store where you would trade Mr. Accessories for new items that we would put out every month. It would only be available for a month, and then that was like overnight, like 10 or 12-fold increase in revenue. Who knew? And that allowed me to hire a bunch of people to help me work on the game, and we've been just continuing to add content to it for the last 13 years as a result of that. But that's why the currency in the cash shop is called Mr. Accessory, in case that you ever see that and wonder why that's weird. The normal currency in the game is, of course, meat. Because when in the initial burst of work that created Kingdom of Loathing in the first place, I had just drawn all of the art I draw, and this is true of West of Loathing too. I draw it with a pen on paper and then scan it, and then in the case of KOL, I make it into a GIF. Now we use PNGs. That technology has really increased. And in the initial set of art that I made when I was first making the game, I was like, okay, well, then maybe we'll put money in here as one of the stats that you have, but I hadn't drawn any coins or anything, so I'm like, well, this steak, sure, meat. Meat is the currency. And also, like a metal that you make weapons and stuff out of, but that's less, there's less about that. So, the backend tools, I can't show you that. Luckily, a brand new character does not have access to our backend administration tools. I don't know why that surprised me to look at that. But because this game is on the web, all of our tools are also on the web, so that's kind of the way that we just work on stuff. And we've spent a lot of time refining those tools to make it, because we don't have to like rig animations, and because we don't have to do a lot of processing to the graphics other than I'll draw a new thing and then scan it and put it in, and it takes minutes to add a new art asset. It was very, very easy for us to create a tremendous amount of content in a small amount of time. And with the new game, we kind of wanted to try and make that also the case as much as possible, because that's sort of what we're good at, is just these jokes are bad, but here's a lot of them. And that makes a game. So I'll tab over and show you West of Loathing. Yeah, it's in Unity. I don't really know how to use Unity that well. Our programmer, Victor Thompson, is in the audience here. He has done an amazing job of supporting our workflow, which I will show you. Yeah. We could reuse a lot of KOL code in this, probably. And we do in a certain way, and I will get to that. But I think if I continue, I can avoid a crash bug that I kept experiencing. Nope. Let's see if I can make a new character and show you the beginning of the game. All right, so you can tell, obviously, higher fidelity than Kingdom of Loathing to begin with, but the style has remained the same, and all of this stuff is still, like I said, just drawn with a pen. We also, Wes Cleveland, our animator, who couldn't be here, is just, I think, does a fantastic job of adding character to these things, and it makes them sell a lot more as a thing that would be in a real video game, as opposed to something that looks like Kingdom of Loathing. Let's see if I can actually create this character without crashing. Yes, we did it. Okay, so now this is a video game where you can move around, and you're a guy on a screen. We did a kind of a proof of concept test a couple years ago where I just wanted to see if it would be possible for me to make art assets and then put them in what I did and still kind of think of as a Paper Mario style, just diorama of two-dimensional things in a three-dimensional space, and got lucky, and it worked out really well. I think I think this definitely feels like a bedroom, and this definitely feels like you're moving around in the bedroom. We got this poster that explains how you move around. If you play it on an iPad, it says click to move. It's dynamic poster technology. We still, in Kingdom of Loathing, we do a lot of just sort of procedurally generated joke text, and there's an example of that very early on in the game where you can hit this bookshelf and it just makes up the title of a teen adventure novel that might have existed in 1895, which is when this game ostensibly takes place. I don't really know. That stuff. It's maybe a little later than that, but and just so that later on I can show you this one particular gag. There is a secret here where if you figure out that these are being randomly generated and you try to generate more of them, you will end up finding a book that you want to take with you called Walking Stupid, which I'll show you in a minute. Initially, the way that you would gain experience in this game was much more complicated. So one of the things that you can do is walk up to your desk and comb your hair, and for combing your hair, you get 1 experience point. And it used to be a particular kind of experience point, which had to do with like how cool you were, but we've ended up collapsing that down to there only being one kind of experience point, which is already more complicated than we want. The bird joke that no one will get, that the game starts with, is you talking to your crow, Russell. You can feed him a cricket, and you can either let him go, or you can just say goodbye to him and leave him at your place. So we'll let him go. Doesn't make any difference at this point, but there'll be things like that where some decision that you make earlier will have at least like minor noticeable repercussions later in the game. So there's a lot of branching narrative stuff going on. With KOL being the sort of competitive speedrun game hidden inside a casual RPG, hidden inside a clicker, I think what this game has really begun to reveal to itself that it is an adventure game with a casual RPG hidden inside it. And so over the course of development, we've done more and more stuff that sort of it front loads the moving around, interacting with stuff, and seeing dumb jokes, and doesn't throw a lot of stat stuff in your face. And we still have a ways to go on it. So this was a way of getting like muscle experience by rearranging this firewood, but now it's just again the same kind of experience. And one of the things that I like about RPGs where you're actually moving around in a world is like opening containers and getting stuff out of containers. And so there's going to be a lot of that, because that is a thing that I think is a lot of fun. It's always nice to see a container and find out what's in it. One kind of container is a haystack, and there's always a needle in a haystack. So, and you use needles to pick locks. So if you find a lock that you need to pick, you just find a haystack and there'll be a needle in it. One thing that is weird about making an adventure game is that I don't really like adventure games. And the thing that I really don't like about them is, I feel like in a typical adventure game, if you eventually stumbled upon a puzzle that needed a needle and you hadn't gotten the one needle that was in this one haystack in the entire world, you would not be able to open that lock, and you would not be able to make any progress in the puzzle. And so we're definitely not going to do stuff like that. KOL had a lot of weird, obscure, puzzly type stuff in there that usually it started out from an honest place where we just thought, oh, it would be funny if this item interacted with this other thing in a goofy way. And that was fine until we made it important to completing a quest and then made 10,000 more items. So you no longer had any way of knowing that this one thing was important if you weren't paying attention when it happened, and when we sort of they made a joke about a new interaction that we just added that you'd be able to find. So you start out by leaving the farm, and then you end up in what is secretly a tutorial, but is really just a prologue. We've tried very hard, and I think we've done an okay job based on playtesting feedback so far of making this a thing where we don't pop up a lot of things explaining to you how to play it. That falls apart a little bit once combat starts, because it's hard to make a combat interface that allows for emergent systemic stuff and also is immediately comprehensible. But pick up a turnip. Pick up a board. Let's see. You can equip the board. I shall see when I go to fight somebody. Hostler's gone drinking, so we can go into the saloon. The music for this game is done by Ryan Ike, who is a great composer and a great dude. I wish he was here, but he's not. If you go to Indiecade next month, you can see him there. He's worked on a lot of games and came very highly recommended, and was a fan of Kingdom of Loathing, and has just been fantastic to work with. So this is where you get your first cowboy hat. Yay! All right, and we've changed the flow of this recently. It used to be that you could just go in and talk to the hostler right away, but then some stuff later assumed that you'd been to the bar, and so we just hey, let's just put the hostler in the bar. That seems like a thing that he would do. And in a minute, I'll show you the tools that we use to make this stuff, and the ease with which new things can go into this system. It was really important to us, based on some experiences that we had working on some other non-KOL projects, that everything in this game be really, really data-driven. There is no reason that this engine has to be a cowboy game. We could just replace the data, and it's an entirely different game just based on the stuff that we work on in these web tools. I'll show you just a little bit more of what's happening in here, and then I'll show you how we kind of make this stuff. There's a guy that turned into a cactus from drinking too much cactus beer. because I'm in a debug mode, I can hold down Shift to run real fast. And let's see. I'll just go and do a fight. Oh no, I can't do a fight because I can't go anywhere else. I need to talk to the hostler. Right. Meat is still money, yeah. So when you go into a mine, that's what they're mining. There's also like other stuff. You'll find some silver nuggets, but that's just kind of a curiosity. Nobody really cares about that. It's the veins of meat that are the important thing. We'll get some more needles while we're in here. Okay, so now we've got a few places opened up on the map of what you still don't know is the tutorial region. So let's go to where the snakes are so we can fight a snake. Yes. Because this was themed as like a child's map of this town where the child would fill in places as they discovered them, and this takes place 5 years before. This map was made 5 years before the game takes place. There's actually there's a newspaper, and we say that it's a newspaper from like 6 weeks ago, so I think that the time frame of the game is actually down to like a specific week in 1895, but I don't remember it right offhand. So the combat, my sort of touchstone for what I think makes a good JRPG style system is Paper Mario, and so try to keep the numbers pretty small and try to keep the interactions pretty limited, but make it so stuff like cool things can happen. Nothing cool is going to happen in this fight other than me fighting this snake, because there aren't other objects that you can interact with. I don't have there's a lot of weird combat items that interact with like weird status effects, and you can poison things, but in this case it's just this is like the first fight that most players are probably going to get into, so it's just very simple, like trading blows. Yeah, I won. And I leveled up, so my muscle went up by 1. And there's a lot of this. This is also an interface that needs a lot of work to make it a little more comprehensible, because there used to be a lot more going on here, and you can. So what we decided to do with this is, instead of making it so a normal like casual player approaching this has to worry about like managing their XP and leveling up their skills and stats independently, by default it just does it for you. And our goal is to make it so you can just play through the entire game and see a lot of stuff and have some fun without having to worry about the numbers on stuff. Except I think we can fairly expect a player, if they find a new weapon, to like equip it, but not like micromanage stats and skills the way that some people want to. But you can go in and just turn that option off, and then you have complete control over the way that your character develops. So if you want to focus like entirely on a speech skill kind of playthrough, it's also really important to me that you be able to beat the game without ever having any combat. Like if you want to just completely avoid combats, you totally can. You can. Except in some limited cases that I've accidentally added that I'll deal with. It's like we basically want it to virtually always be possible for you to just say, oh, I did not actually want to start a fight, and be able to. You're not going to obviously be able to see all of the content in the game that way, but it is a viable way to play the game if you're just not interested in the combat system. Let's see. This fight was balanced such that if you are trying to just swing the weapon over and over again, you won't win, so you actually have to like use one of your skills like that. So that increases your muscle, which makes you do more damage when you get hit and take less damage. Do more damage when you hit and take less damage when you get hit. But alternatively, you could like use first aid to survive longer, and this just it was intended to demonstrate, okay, there is slightly more going on in combat than just button mashing. And again, like you can get out of the prologue without doing this stuff. This is just one of the horses that the hostler wants you to rescue. And we need to figure out a good way to communicate this to the player, but what you're doing in the sort of prologue town is picking what horse you want to take with you, and then you're picking what companion you want to take with you, which partner you go with. And the partners will have like sort of different storylines and different abilities that they have in combat, and the horse that you pick determines what kind of random encounters you get when you're moving between areas on the map. The prologue stuff does not have any random encounters because you're not really moving around on the map, you're just kind of teleporting. But one of the horses is like, you never have to have any wandering monsters attack you if you want to. One of them is the crazy horse, so you get a lot of weird stuff happening. One of them is the pale horse, so you get a lot of like undead themed things. You run into a lot more skeletons and fewer goblins if you're on that horse. And also, the main quest line of this game is pretty. It's short and to the point. Something that I feel like I wish more people would acknowledge is like the way that people play in general a game like Skyrim or Fallout, the new Fallout games, is. And for me especially, like, I never care about the main storyline, and I wish that they would just kind of let me dick around in a world and do little side story things. And so in making this, my focus is like entirely on supporting that stuff. The main quest line is like helping the Manifest Destiny Railroad Company run their line from Topeka to Frisco, because the civilization was basically where it was in the 1890s, but then there was this cataclysmic event where the cows came home, and all of the cows just turned into these demonic monsters and sort of ruined everything. And so it's gone back to a wilder version of the West. And I mean, also there's goblins, so that, I'm not sure where that fits into the alternate history, but so you basically just have these like 3 chunks of a main quest where you're helping them build the railroad, and there's a bunch of different ways to solve each of those 3 main things, but none of them really take all that long. So most of what you're going to be doing in a playthrough is just poking around, exploring corners and stuff. And so we wanted to make sure that, because the main way of playing through the game can be pretty short, like, I didn't know how those games worked when I played Oblivion, for instance, and so I played Oblivion, and 4 hours in, when I beat it, I was like, why do people like these games? This is weird. And so by doing that whole, like, you pick a horse and a partner in the prologue, and those have a pretty significant effect on what kind of stuff you see in your playthrough, we want to make it very clear that this is meant to be replayed if you don't want to really exhaustively explore it the first time through. So secret debug key to just lose a fight that you're in instantly. So I think what I want to do now is show you the tools that we use to make content for this, because they are cool. Let's see, how do I get... Alt-Tab works weirdly differently when you are... connected to a projector. Okay, so you can see that the tools that we use for making this look a lot like playing Kingdom of Loathing. So let's say we wanted to look at the... No, not Dirtwater. We wanted to look at that main street that we were on. Do you guys know about frames? So they're super cool. It's like 1 line of code to make them, and they're totally cross-browser compatible, and they're like user configurable and really effortlessly, and it's like they're really great. And they look cool. Somebody comes to your website and you've got frames, they're immediately like, this website really knows what it's doing. So this is what it looks like when we're building out an area. So it uses the same sprites, and the only things that don't show up in here are if there's like an animated thing that actually has to be a Unity prefab where I hand off assets to Wes, the animator, and he builds a thing that is rigged to move around. So like you can't see the cactus dude on here because there's just not like a placeholder sprite for him. He's just got a prefab property on the element that tells it to swap in that prefab instead of just using a static sprite. The rest of these are just PNGs that I've drawn and scanned in. And so they just have like properties on them, and then there's like a script that runs when you run into it. And so this one, like when you bounce into a cactus, it like makes you sad for 0.7 seconds, and you say something from this set of things that you can say when you get stuck by a cactus. And so we can... So that syntax is... Many years ago, I made up a scripting language for KOL so that the writers could do more of the sort of like branching choice-based stuff, so that I didn't have to have a hand in every single bit of like interactive content that went in. Over time, as people requested more features to use it, that became more and more of like a real scripting language. It doesn't have a name. And the version of it that we've ended up with for West of Loathing is way, way more complicated. But if I go to like here, let's go to Bill, which has a pretty, not like a crazy long conversation, but this is a lot more like what the scripting language was designed to do in KOL. So it's basically like it is just a dialogue tree system for talking to an NPC. But because we want to like keep track of like, well, did he ask you for a newspaper yet or not? Or so we like it has always been important for us for like text things to make sense, just because KOL was so text heavy that that was really all there was to it. And so if we like didn't like get the grammar right, if you were fighting a plural monster versus a singular monster, like that was going to reflect really badly on the parts of the game that there was no reason for us not to do a good job on. And so we just don't want to, like, I want to avoid the thing where it's like every time you go talk to this NPC, it's like they're meeting you for the first time. So we needed a thing where there was some state tracking and the ability to just sort of give you items and do things to your stats and take items away when you've brought them back to somebody or whatever. And so it gradually just got more and more features, and to the point where, and I was not expecting this, but the Victor managed to pull some real wizardry here. I'll show you. We can just look at like a combat script. I don't know what like the complicated. Let's see. I suppose you can just look at the longer ones. So the same scripting language is used for the things that happen in combat. So this is that same language, but it's doing things like not letting you target yourself with your own melee attack, and not letting you target an empty space with a melee attack, and picking an animation based on whether the weapon. Actually, this might not be the real one, now that I think about it, but it just does things like certain weapons have different animations that they need to run when the melee attack plays and stuff like that. And so sound effects are wired up into this, and all of the animations are wired up into this, and like positioning, moving the dudes around on the grid all takes place in this. Enemy AI is in this. Like this guy is designed to, there's a fight later on that is intended to teach the player about targeting. And so there's somebody who's behind cover. And what that means is that if you try to shoot them, you have to knock the cover out of the way first. And so it just takes a couple of rounds to actually get a shot in on them. But there's a person in the back who's not behind cover, but they will just insta-kill you on the second round if you let them aim. So you just have to learn that you need to target the other person. And so the guy in the front, like, there's just this that sort of makes him harmless. Like, he mostly just shoots wildly into the air and runs a different animation than if he was actually doing damage to you. Just things like handling what happens when the player is poisoned. Like, also, just still in the script, like, it just, like, okay, well, whenever we're gonna run this, then we need to pause for a second to make sure the player's, like, standing still and not still in the middle of running somebody else, and then do this damage and pass in this argument to damage self that tells you that it's poison damage, so that in the damage script, which I think is called generic damage.
Why did you choose to do it this way instead of the traditional sort of Unity way?
So that all of us could make content, not just the people who knew how to program or who knew Unity specifically. And I think that it was much harder to spin up with it working this way, but it works a lot better with the pipeline that we've developed over the years with KOL. Like, it needs to be, and the biggest thing, we made a game called Word Realms a few years ago that definitely some people liked it, but it was, to me, way more valuable as a learning experience than it is as a video game. And one of the things that I learned from that is that, like, everyone needs to be able to add content to this thing, and it needs to not get in the way of all of us being able to do that, all of us being able to fix stuff. And so, like, this thing, it has the disadvantage of, like, not having source control, for instance, but we've also, like, spent years and years and years developing web apps, so, like, there are secretly revision histories for all of these things. So, like, it's never, like, there's not going to be something catastrophic that happens just because two of us are editing a code block at the same time. That actually happens when we try to do stuff in Unity. Whenever I try to mess around with, like, an animation state machine or any of the stuff to do anything that I can fix, Victor has to spend, like, an hour on the phone with me yelling about, why won't Git just let me work? Like, all I want is to throw away my changes and just download the build of the games and run it. It's the worst thing in the world. So basically because I am old and set in my ways, the game works like this so that we can all just like, I just want to type some stuff into a web form and hit save and then be able to tab back over to the game and have that happen. So and something that we did here that we don't do in KOL was, so let's say on here that, actually let me go to the, go to our like debug area. So this is just a thing that you can teleport to in debug builds that gives you a lot of stuff. There's this, this recently got this like part addressable ghost person prefab in that I was testing out there. This makes a stream of particles fly out of the bottom left corner of that sign. That's an important feature in case we want. And then there's just like, and you know, there's a bunch of stuff over here that I was like testing stuff on before. That giant skeleton guy was just a thing for the trailer, and nothing in the game was meant to be at that scale. But like that guy's definitely going to be an enemy in the game. It would be absurd not to reuse that. Although I will probably give him feet if we're going to put him. You couldn't see his feet in the trailer, so I'm like, well, I'm going to waste time drawing feet.
So is this basically like a client to is like all of the game data somewhere else?
It is, yeah. All of the game data is just in a MySQL database on the KOL servers. I mean, it's running on a local copy, right? Like we just pull data, but this is why I needed to be on the internet for this talk. Is when we pull data, there's a PHP script on our end that just exports the entire game basically into a big JSON file that then gets pulled in. And I think that what I would really like to do, if this turns out to be practical, is to just ship the game with that JSON file in plain text so that people can just mod it. I think that also means that they'll just be able to look at the data and see every secret thing that's hidden in the game. But that gives me so much less heartburn than it did when I was younger. Like the idea of somebody like being able to deliberately ruin their experience of playing, like, yeah, they do, and they're going to figure it out anyway, right? It'll just be on a wiki which is easier to get to than like poring over our weirdly formatted JSON. So,
So does that also mean that if anyone in your team updates anything in the web form, everyone immediately can see it without actually needing to like rebuild the game?
You don't have to rebuild the game. You just have to pull. I'll show you. There's sort of two versions of it. The other nice thing is that when I make a new art asset, I just save it in a directory on my computer, and then it uploads through Dropbox to a repository on the server, which then goes into a different place. Like there's a Dropbox step and then an rsync step for some reason. I think, and then when you pull new sprites, it just also that takes like maybe 30 seconds as opposed to the code changes, which are instantaneous. But it lets us do things like this. Like if I wanted to, wait, Alt Tab really does not work with the projector plugged in. Come on, where's my dock? There we go. So if I wanted to go and edit this area, like let's say that I wanted to add a new object to here, put that right at the top of the list. As a placeholder, oops, we can just like draw a thing. Okay, so we'll call that triangle guy. We'll give it a minute and an extra step to actually use it, and then we will place it right there and save that element. And then let's say that we want that guy to say hello when you walk up to him. So then, and this is the one where because there's an art asset involved in it, it takes a second, especially on a slow internet connection, for like the Dropbox sync to work and then the rsync thing to work. Just hit Shift R in a development builder if we're working on it in the Unity editor. And it's slightly faster than this on a real internet connection, but still surprisingly practical to do over just a tethered cell phone. And more often than not, we don't actually need to like completely re-download all of the sprites in the game to make a change. More often than not, we're just doing a much more efficient version of this that just pulls the scripts. As I say, it doesn't take too long. And
you probably mentioned this before, but how long did you work on this?
how long has it been? Like a year and a half? And at this point, like, I don't know. I describe it as being like almost entirely feature complete. Like there is nothing fundamental missing that stops us from, okay, so then there's that guy just in a playable version of the game, and when you walk up to him, he says hello. And if we wanted to change it to say like, hey, instead of having to like completely recompile everything and rebuild everything, we just download the scripts. And this on a real internet connection is just like a second, it wasn't even that long on this one. But now he says hey instead of hello. So like it's that fast to get real data into the game. And that is just so great for us because we are accustomed to just being able to do that stuff. Like something about KOL that is not, I would not recommend. But in the beginning, it was, everything was running on like sort of dedicated hosting that we were paying for elsewhere. And so the idea of having a separate development and production environment was just like, well, it would just be twice as expensive to do this. So we just didn't. So every change to this MMO was happening live, which is why there were so many problems. We eventually fragmented out the actual PHP scripts to a development environment, but it was still touching the same database. Just because duplicating the entire database across, it made it weird for the testers to be playing on the development environment and not have the things that happen to them reflect their experience of their characters in the real game. But we are accustomed to very, very quickly being able to add stuff, and it's sort of the way that we work because so many of our ideas are so dumb that if we give ourselves any time at all to talk ourselves out of them, we won't do them. And so it is critical to the tone of the game and to meeting our players' expectations that we be able to do that stuff really, really quickly. I don't know if there's really anything else that's super interesting in the tools.
Have you thought about or do you plan on like doing some sort of post-mortem, basically about like how you made the tools, how they work, how someone, I don't know, like me might replicate this process because it's super neat?
Yeah, I certainly would. It seems like I've apparently gotten to a point in my career where they're starting to let me talk places. So yeah. So yeah, no, I mean, I because we've been living with it for so long, like it doesn't seem like the idea that one of your character classes is a disco bandit, like that doesn't seem weird to me at all anymore. And meat as currency doesn't seem weird to me at all anymore. And all of the things that we do don't seem interesting really because it's just the way that we've always done it. But the more other game developers we meet, the more it's like, wow, nobody really does it this way. And like it absolutely has disadvantages, but it has some real advantages too. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you. This is one of my favorite things that Wes has done. That Walking Stupid book that I picked up. One of the things that I think is more important with this game than with KOL is that there be a bunch of kind of weird one-off visual gags, because if we're gonna try to sell this game to people as though it were like a real like video game, it needs to not rely completely on the writing in order to be funny, because that's really going to limit the audience to people who want to read screenfuls of text. But this puts you into a mode where your walk animations are randomly replaced with a bunch of very silly walk animations, and Victor spent the time making the footstep sounds match up with these. That one I like. And there's like 10 more of these that Wes just did that are even better. But yeah, so that was a cool thing that I intended to show everybody and forgot about. What else did I want to show everybody and forget about? Oh yeah, so you saw the scope of the tutorial area, and we're gonna, okay, there's some spoilers here. Okay, let's go to the railroad camp. So here you can see that's what, there will eventually be a train there. This is the horse that I've picked, this is the partner that I've picked. And when you go here, you see what will eventually be the main map for the real game. And compared to the prologue size, like this is the scope of stuff that's going to be in there. There are like hundreds of rooms and areas that you can walk into, and lots and lots and lots of things that happen to you in between there. And there's a real intimidating amount of work left before this game's totally releases in early 2017. But yeah, that's our history. That's our game. And that was probably not an hour. So if anybody else had any other questions about this or about KOL, I'm happy to sit and talk about it.
Yes, could we talk about the giant skeleton for a minute?
Sure.
We've discussed, and we think he should not have feet.
Okay.
Do you want to know why?
Why?
Well, lots of games got giant skeletons, right? Mm-hmm. But how many of them's got giant skeletons with no feet?
That's a good point. And it probably wouldn't be too hard to narratively justify why this skeleton doesn't have feet. And also,
Well,
as far as I can tell, because of the spotlight, this is God speaking to
Yeah,
me.
no,
so,
let's keep it that way.
I better do what
It's
you
just
say.
a voice in the dark. But you could have a really good mystery line about people just see him, but they never see him walking. So how does he get around?
Right, and there's like in that town in England, feet, like severed feet, keep washing up on the beach. There could
What?
be another. There could be this is a real.
What? That's above my pay grade.
I didn't
don't know
make this
nothing
up.
about that.
You can also create like a creature that like just eats people's feet.
Oh right, and he's one of the earliest victims from when that creature was really big. Yeah. Oh, also, I had thought of a joke earlier that I wanted to make for people who were at the earlier talk. To decide on the color palette of this game, I decided to Google Mongolia. But I forgot to make it an image search, so I just got the Wikipedia article for Mongolia, and I was like, oh, black on white. That's, I like that.
We got a question here.
Hi, we're two people from England, and this is the first time we've heard about feet washing up on the beach. And now we're a bit worried.
I think it is in Bath. There's like a particular river where multiple feet have washed up over the last couple of years, and they don't know where they're from.
Cheers, I'll check it out.
It's a Pocus stop.
After release, do you think you'll develop any expansion packs or additional content?
It is my hope that enough people will buy this game that it will make sense for us to do that. Yeah. It's easy to add stuff in. I mean, it's kind of wide open spaces, so there's plenty of room to put more areas and stuff in. And because so much of the game is focused on these kind of bite-sized side quest things, I think that developing some more of those and selling that as a little pack is completely reasonable. And also, I guess I didn't talk much about like the business model of this. We're very fortunate, I think, in a really competitive time now to have a big existing audience to, at the very least, even if they don't all buy it, to kind of signal boost for us and to lend some legitimacy to it, to get some attention paid to it. It's also very helpful that like a lot of games journalists like played Kingdom of Loathing when they were children and have a soft spot for it. But this game we are really thinking of as an investment in the engine, so that if it doesn't do great, like this game does not need to make all of its money back in order for it to be worth it for us to make another game, because making another game in it will not take anywhere near as long as this one did or require nearly the resources. Sorry, Victor. What would be great is if we can just keep adding features to it. I mean, the obviously best case scenario is this game sells well enough for us to just keep the band together completely and just keep making cool stuff for it. And I really want to do a Lovecraftian horror one. I really want to do a kind of Flash Gordon style space opera one. I want to do a way more procedurally generated like post-apocalyptic one. Like there's a lot of plans, and if the world allows those plans to come to fruition, some of them will also definitely be DLC for West of Loathing.
Hi, so you made the joke about the black and white color in the Wikipedia. I noticed blue for something really important, and I was wondering what you were thinking about. How special is color to you, and like what's your internal compass on when to use color?
So The kind of the methodology that we have for KOL is use color when it's funny or when it's communicating important game state. So like the blue is like the enchantments on a piece of gear or what the thing does, like drawing attention to the actual functional elements of a thing as distinct from the goofy flavor text description of it. So I think using it sparingly to... We also use it in KOL if you're like dealing elemental damage, like hot damage shows up in red, and I've done some of that on here too. Just to make it clear that this is different than a normal number, it's red, or to make it clear that this is not a joke. This is a thing about a video game. Then it's in blue on the items. Yeah, well, probably for jokes sometimes. Yeah, I'm sure there are things where in writing some item description in KOL, I made a word a different color for some dumb reason. Yeah, every once in a while we'll hide stuff by putting it in white on white, so you have to select it. We did a world event in KOL a long time ago where we introduced a plague into a certain limited number of players, and what it did was it slowly made the things that you said in chat fade from black to white over the more days you had it, the dimmer your text got, and so that was kind of fun. But I don't know that gray really counts as a color, black and white.
Got a question over here?
So it wasn't really as much a question. It was just it's hearing you talk about like the desire to add more content and how easy it would be to make other games with this engine. Just an idea that I've always wanted to see a game like a pretty long game that seems really story driven or thematic, I guess. That just slowly and subtly changes themes in some random way and then just completely retcons like as it goes, like just like maybe once in a while you have like a rocket ship and you never really explain why there's a rocket ship in 1895, and then slowly more rocket ships come in and less horses.
Right, and then
it just becomes a rocket ship game.
After you've seen 3 rockets, all of the horses that you've seen before turn into motorcycles.
Exactly.
And then after you've seen 6 rockets, then they turn into
and then
other
just
motorcycles.
do that like 2 or 3 times, and just by the end you're just like, what the hell is going on?
It's easy to draw the assets for this, but not so easy that I want to sign up for drawing like 6 times as many assets for it. But
All right. So anybody else who wants to use that, that's a freebie. Do we have any other questions from the audience, or do we have any questions from the Twitch stream? No questions. How you feeling up there, Zach?
no, I'm all right. So after we worked on our game Word Realms, one thing that came out of that was we got hired by this company to develop an educational game, and that had to be in Unity. And essentially over the course of that project, we learned, all right, well, Unity can be a front end for this scripting stuff that we use the same scripting language for that game too. It's maybe a thing you'll be able to buy soon. I don't know. But we then just, okay, this is definitely a model that works. Unity is a new enough thing that, like Word Realms we wrote in Flash, and it was kind of in the last days of Flash, and then development took so long that it was like just, there was less and less support for it, and Unity feels like a platform that's not going to happen with, at least over the course of the development of one thing. And so, yeah. And it was also just, it's a lot of people just know how to use it, so it's easy to hire people who are, like, have at least a baseline familiarity with it. And there's just a tremendous community behind it for when you have questions about how stuff works or why haven't they fixed this bug yet.